Hi, folks. I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much for joining me. Yes, I hope I am back. My daughter was admitted to intensive care, ICU, the emergency room, on the 27th of this month. She has a brain virus. I haven't posted a video since the 26th. I was going to do one on the 27th. It hit her so hard and so fast. It is, and it was, and it's still very scary. It's all started about a month ago with really bad headaches. I had taken her to the emergency room twice prior to them admitting her into intensive care. This here is the one image of her wristband on the 21st when I took her into the emergency room because of the headaches. The first time I took her to the emergency room, she saw her primary physician the following day. I believe it was on the 19th. And then on the 21st, we were back again. And on the 27th, that's when they did a spinal tap and found out she has a brain virus. She was scheduled for a MIR to find out why she was getting such severe headaches on the 27th. Never made the appointment because she was in ICU at that time. Her primary physician here in Watertown had done an initial COVID test to find out maybe if it was COVID that was giving her headaches, and it came back negative. Evidently, there is over 100 types of viruses that can go to people's brain. I found out today after doing some research about this. This last time she was admitted to the emergency room, intensive care, where she was admitted and stayed for 5 days. It was a nightmare. Let me start at the time. I'll tell you about what happened when I took her in on the 27th of this month. Hopefully what we went through, what I went through, she went through, family members went through, can help other people in such a situation. God, I hope you don't go through this. So from the time of the 21st until the 27th, everything was fine. No headaches, nothing like that. I thought, oh, good, because she was getting headaches about every 3 to 5 days. Like I said, I had taken her to the emergency room twice because the headaches were so painful. Nothing like she has ever felt before. We all got up in the morning. She drove the kids to school and then came home. I was upstairs in my bedroom working on a video, and she came up to my bedroom, crawled into my bed. Her legs were shaking, and she was moaning and holding her head, the right side of her head where most of the pain was at. And yeah, shaking, literally shaking. And I asked her, you want me to take you to the emergency room? And she said yes. So within 20 minutes from being fine to being in extreme pain, it just hit so hard. It didn't come on slowly. It just went wham. She doesn't even now remember driving the kids to school or even coming home. I don't have a car, so we jumped into her car. I of course, was going to drive, and I asked her for the car keys, and she just couldn't answer at that point. She couldn't answer me. And I kept saying, Sarah, where's your car keys? Where are your car keys? I went through her purse, looked in the ignition, came back into the house, all the usual places for car keys, no car keys. So I came back outside, and I was panicked at that time because a little bit of her face on the right side below her mouth was drooping, and my first thought, because she couldn't talk at that point, was a stroke. I looked down the street, and there was a police officer about 3 doors down, and I ran down to him and asked him to call an ambulance. I thought she was having a stroke. And he told me, well, you should drive her because it would be quicker. And I told him, I don't know where the car keys are at. So he called the ambulance. It was there within probably 5 minutes. Luckily, the emergency responders, the paramedics, they let me ride with her. I had to sit in the front of the ambulance and rode with her to the emergency room, and they took her in pretty quick and went into the ICU. At that point, she was basically probably a vegetable. like a 3-year-old. They kept asking her questions, and the only thing she could say or did say was her birth date. And she kept repeating her birth date for every question they asked her. Where she was at, what her name was, the typical questions. What town did she live in? What state? What year was it? And she only could repeat her birthday, which is 8/7/88. After a couple hours, she was talking a little bit more, but what she was saying was her birthday. When asked a question, she would say, 8/7/88. Is that right, Mommy? And started calling me Mommy. And she always calls me Mom. And then hugging onto me. I was holding her, hugging onto me like a 3-year-old. Yeah, and she goes, 8/7/88. Is that right, Mommy? Is that right, Mommy? 8/7/88. Is that right, Mommy? Over and over and over. We were in the emergency room for at least 11 hours before a room became available in ICU. During that time, they did a CAT scan. They said that they would not do a MRI because they didn't think she could sit still because she was just shaking and shaking. But they did do a CAT scan. Being either in the fight or flight mode, she slapped the nurse, and then the nurse got really irate and rude. And I said to the nurse, well, haven't you ever worked with Alzheimer patients or Alzheimer patients that were violent? And she said she had, but they had an IV in her arm that she kept trying to take out. And then later she kept saying, I want to go home, I want to go home, and was trying to take the IVs that they had in her arm out. So the same nurse wrapped up her arm, putting a wrist splint on it so she couldn't move her wrist, and wrapped it so tight that it was painful, almost cutting off her blood circulation. My daughter lifted her hand maybe about 1 inch, 2 inch, and the nurse goes, don't you hit me again. Don't you hit me. And she didn't even lift her arm. She just was wiggling her wrist. So they did a spinal tap. I held my daughter so she would lay calmly as they injected the needle into her back to withdraw the fluids from her spine to see, what she possibly could have that was affecting her brain. So afterwards, my daughter kept asking me, what's going on, Mommy? What's going on, Mommy? So after about 11 hours, they finally got a room available for her. And this same nurse took her gurney that she was laying on to take her up to the second floor and practically ran down the hallway with me following. And I said to the nurse, I'm almost 70 years old. I'm going to be 70 years old in about a week, and I can't walk that fast. And the nurse says to me, well, these gurneys are heavy, and I have momentum, and I can't stop. I got to keep my momentum. So when she reached the elevator, which was on the other side of the building, it seemed like, I caught up out of breath, and we went up to the second floor where my daughter was put into her own room. So my daughter went to the emergency room at about 8:45 a.m. in the morning. And we had to wait until somewhere around 8 p.m. until she got into her own room. So much of it is basically a blur to me. Remembering bits and pieces of the horror that we went through. The doctor came in and said how they were doing cultures in petri dishes to find out what type of infection she had in her brain. But the test would take 24 hours. So here you can see on the 28th, these are the different viruses and bacteria that they tested her for, which is really dumb in my opinion. If you got over 100 different types of viruses, you wouldn't test for the same thing over and over again. She had already been tested by her primary doctor for coronavirus and COVID. But they did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coronaviruses just to find out different strains. Well, in my opinion, all they would have had to done was just one. If it came back positive, then they could go in and find out the different strains. Then they also got the Metap whatever HMPV virus, which is basically a cold virus, and it starts out with a coughing and wheezing and sore throat, which she didn't have any of that. The only thing, any symptoms she ever had, other than she said that her arms, she couldn't move her arms, and her hands were tingling. That was it. So no signs of cold or anything like that. The rhinovirus, which is also related to the common cold, but they listened to her lungs, her heart, and all that. No sign of a cold whatsoever. Influenza A, influenza B, influenza, or a para-influenza, 4 different strains, and a respiratory. She had nothing going on whatsoever with her respiratory system. So why they were testing for respiratory viruses and not the other things like the CDC has been warning us about, like the EEE virus, I'll get more into that. But then they also tested for 3 or 4 different type of bacteria. Now, if you have a virus, come to find out, there is absolutely nothing they can do. There is no medicine, no antiviral medicine that they can give you for a virus. But if it was a bacteria, yeah, they could. And they tested for 4 different types of pneumonia, which again was all related to the lungs, which she did not have symptoms of. She had all the symptoms of a possible stroke. Not being able to move her arms, and the pain or tingling in her hands. Yeah, so, yeah, other than just to run up someone's medical bills, she's got insurance through her work. She's worked at Walmart for over 10 years if she keeps her job now, because she's been off work for so long. And Walmart only allows you to miss 5 days. They don't care if you're on death's doorway, which she obviously was. So the doctor there at the hospital said she's got a virus. He thought it was a rare virus. They had no idea what type it was, but they proceeded to give her antibiotics for probably 4 days. They put her on antibiotics as soon as she got in there to the emergency room. I asked them to transfer her to Sioux Falls right away. Sioux Falls, evidently. Stanford Hospital is probably supposedly one of the best that they got here in the state, or to send her to Minneapolis there to the Mayo Clinic. They did send 1 test or 2 tests to the Mayo Clinic, which was for herpes, the common cold sore, which, recently I read how the herpes virus, which is a cold sore, which is related to the chickenpox virus, can go to people's brain. That's the only thing they sent to Mayo Clinic, and that they both came back negative. They didn't test her for the Eastern equine encephalitis. Why, I don't know. The CDC put out a warning about this, how it is a rare but serious disease. And after doing more research, well, there isn't just the Eastern equine encephalitis that people can get from a mosquito, but the Western equine encephalitis. Like I said, and I brought this up to the doctor because I was talking to a woman who worked there at the hospital back in 2005. One of her relatives died from equine encephalitis. Evidently, he caught it because of a mosquito that bit a horse that then bit him, and after he died, they did an autopsy, and they found out that he had equine encephalitis. I talked to infectious disease there in Sioux Falls. It was a video conference, and I brought up about this equine encephalitis, and he said to me, well, they've never had that here in South Dakota, which, doing my research, I found out is not true. Not true, not only because of the woman that I talked to, but here it shows that there's been 26 to 50 cases in Kansas, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, and South Dakota. And here the infectious disease specialist, supposed specialist, didn't know even that there was a case in 2005 where this man died from it. I asked him, how many people here in South Dakota a year get brain infections? And he goes, oh, thousands and thousands. It's not that rare. Yeah, I think he was, not telling the whole truth. The physician there in ICU wanted to take her off of the antibiotics. He said that she should probably stay on them for at least 10 days. You know, they say they don't work, but she was getting better after about 3 days. And, but the physician, he's got the last word. So they took her off the antibiotics, saying that she's got to have her own body fight off the disease on its own. So here on the CDC page, which is not even correct, it says during the 1930s and 1940s, there were no periodic outbreaks. Maybe they're only talking about outbreaks, I don't know, of Western equine encephalitis among people. The number of reported human cases started decreasing in the 1960s and 1970s, with no reported human cases since 1999. But like I said, this woman said that her relative died in 2005. It might not have been the Western equine encephalitis, but he did in fact die from equine encephalitis, and she knew enough about it, saying that he caught it from a mosquito that bit a horse. I'm not saying that's what my daughter's got. We don't know what my daughter's got. So they put her spinal fluid into a petri dish to see if it would grow. They said between 24 and 48 hours. It took 48 hours before it started to grow, but they didn't recognize what it was. So then they went to grow it again, but only gave it 24 hours. They said they were trying to regrow it from the same petri dish that was already showing sign that there was in fact a virus, which seemed weird. I mean, I could see like they drew extra fluid so that they could do multiple testing. So why would you try and regrow from the same petri dish? It just didn't make sense. And they said when they tried to regrow the virus that they had already started to grow 48 hours later, that nothing was happening. So either they screwed up with the original and they screwed up and disposed of the extra spinal fluid. I don't know. I couldn't get a straight coherent answer. But they only waited 24 hours, and I asked them, why are you only waiting 24 hours when it only showed up after 48 hours? Yeah, and no one could give me an answer. Now, to become a nurse in a hospital only takes 2 years of medical education. You can go for 4 years if you want to, go deeper into becoming a nurse. The one nurse that we got the last day that we're there, actually day 4, she had been a nurse for 22 years, and she went to college to get her bachelor's degree to become a nurse. So I was really impressed with that. And she was super nice. The last day they were there, we got some really great nurses. But the nurses we had the first 3 days, oh my gosh, I don't know why they even decided to go into the profession, other than what this one doctor would say about new doctors, how the new doctors these days, in this day and age, are suitors. And I asked him, what do you mean the doctors are suitors? And he said, because they're only in it for the money to buy their fancy suits. Like I said, there's over 100 different types of viruses. So I was looking up about muscles and reflexes of the body become weak. They call it acute flaccid myitis. That's another possibility of what she could have, because she did say that she couldn't move her arms and her fingers were tingly. They hurt, which of course they haven't tested her for. Increases in AFM cases have occurred in 2014, 16, and 18 in the U.S. Most AFM cases, more than 90%, have been in young children. Okay, so we got most common symptoms are sudden onset of arm or leg weakness, loss of muscle tone. I talked about how it looked like around her mouth on the one side, looked like it was drooping, loss of reflexes. Again, this is something that cannot be treated. This virus can be caused by West Nile virus, Japanese encephalitis virus, the herpes virus, and the endovirus. Many of these viruses that I read about, one of them said there was often an uptick between the months of August and November. Testing and diagnosis. It is important that the tests to help with diagnosis are done as soon as possible after a patient develops symptoms. Yeah, which they didn't do. They tested for, viruses of like a cold. And every one of these 100 or so viruses all said the same thing. There is no specific treatment for AMF, but a clinician who specializes in disease like AMF may recommend certain interventions on a case-to-case basis. For example, they may recommend physical or occupational therapy to help with arm or leg weakness caused by AMF. Physician rehabilitation might improve long-term outcome if implemented during the initial phase of the illness. So somewhere on my daughter's phone, because I gave my phone to my grandson so he could get in contact with me, and he was left in charge of my 4 kitties to feed them every day and clean their kitty box and spend time with them. Somewhere on my phone I have a video of her monitor, the alarms going off. Her blood pressure got down to 36 or 38 beats per minute. Now they say that people who are resting could have a heartbeat of between 40 and 60, but hers were below that, which is called bradycardia, slow heart rate. So when it got down below 40, the monitor started flashing a yellow light and beeping and sending a message to the nurses to come in and check her out, see what was going on. Here it says your heart rate may drop below 60 beats per minute during deep sleep. Physically active adults and athletes often have a resting heart rate slower than 60. Hers was 30, I believe 38 beats per minute. A heart rate that is too slow can cause insufficient blood flow to the brain. Symptoms of bradycardia include fatigue or feeling weak, dizziness or lightheadedness, confusion. Well, she was definitely confused. Like I said, I thought she had a stroke. Fainting or near fainting, shortness of breath, tiring easily during exercise, and chest pains. Well, she didn't have the chest pains, and she just felt like completely wiped out, exhausted while she laid for, 5 days in bed. So the monitor was flashing yellow, beeping, beeping, beeping. And I went out to the hall outside of her room, and here was 3 nurses, 2 women and 1 male. And it was beeping for at least 10 minutes. So, I wanted to see, is anyone coming down? Is there anyone at the nurses' station? And these 3 people, nurses, were sitting there laughing and giggling. And he was talking about how his wife just had a baby, and it was the ugliest baby that he had ever seen. Granted, he was 26 years old, but you would think, I mean, everyone thinks their baby, normally most people think their baby is, the best looking baby in the world, but he's bragging to these two female nurses how his baby is ugly instead of answering the alarm. So I stood there and I watched probably for another 5 minutes, and he looks down and he sees me, and he backs up into like a little cubby hole where the wall is blocking my view to see him. But I can still see him because of all the patient windows, the doors and the windows. It's all glass there in ICU. And I see him looking at the nurses and with his left hand pointing to me for the other nurses to look to see what he's pointing at. And at that point I says, I can see you in the reflection of all these windows. And instead of answering your alarms that are going off for your patients, you're down here yakking. So then he came down. And then what they ended up doing is turning the volume off in her room so we couldn't hear the beeping of the alarm going off anymore. I would think that them at the nurse's station could hear the alarm going off, but with the alarm going off about every half hour, which was very stressful. It's like, what's going on? Is she, sleeping and not going to wake up? 38 beats per minute. Maybe that's serious. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I only know what I looked up, online. They also had a monitor there at the nurse's station of her heart and what everything was doing, showing the blood pressure and all that. So they could see it. So I know they could see it. So I'm there for 4 days, and I'm sleeping there for 4 or 5 days. She finally got released 5. I was there with her 24/7. And when I think the second, third day, they brought a meal up and wanted to know what she wanted to eat. I think it was the third day. And so I was going to order myself the same. And they said I couldn't do it. They didn't tell me that I could order my own meal tray and pay for it myself. They didn't tell me that. They said that I couldn't order food. Being the weekend, I was also told that the cafeteria was closed. There was 4 snack machines downstairs. Eventually, I did go down there and I found it, but it was nothing but 2 machines of different types of drinks, and then 2 more machines of some really gross out little cakes and potato chips and cheese chip snacks. I want to say that. Just some really not Pringles, but Fringles, the onion chips. Just some really gross stuff. I did get me a Coke out of the machine. It was $2.50 for the Coke. And then Monday came, and that's when I found out that the cafeteria was open on the weekends, but limited, between 8 a.m. I believe and 10 a.m. So I could have easily gone down there and got some food. So Monday, when the cafeteria was open, that's when I found out that the cafeteria, in fact, was open on the weekends. And talking about, I don't know how you can ruin food, but how people often talk about hospital food being horrible. So I had scrambled eggs with cheese and bacon. That's what I got for my breakfast Monday morning. I don't know. It was the worst tasting scrambled eggs that I ever had in my life. And granted, it was probably freeze-dried eggs, but I don't know how you can ruin eggs. But it was totally, totally gross. And I am not a picky eater. I did eat the bacon. And so the scrambled eggs and the 4 pieces of bacon came to $10.95. At least I got to eat bacon. So I don't know if it was that day. I believe it was probably Sunday, because her test came back that she had a virus and they put the little stickers on the door or signs on the door. You couldn't go into her room unless you wore a mask. So that was probably the 29th. I went outside in the morning for a little bit. I probably yacked with one of the people that worked there for, I was probably gone for a good hour or so. Maybe even 2 hours, just, to get some exercise and some sunlight. So when I came back to her room, I found her food tray sitting on the little box that said isolation, sitting there. And so I picked it up and I took it into her room, and by then her food was cold. I went back to the nurse's station and asked them why her food wasn't taken into her room. Well, the kitchen isn't allowed to go into an isolation room. So they just set it on the whatever they can set it on. Outside of her room, and then the nurse would have to take it into her room. Well, it's the same nurse that was flirting with the two other nurses, and I asked him why he didn't take the food into her to eat and that it was cold. And he says to me, "Oh, I didn't know they brought her food." Well, excuse me, before I went downstairs, I saw this giant rack being wheeled down a different hall with all the trays for all the food for all the other patients. They go right by the nurse's station. And it's like, okay, so you didn't see him delivering the rack with all the trays? With all the food, you didn't see it, and you're sitting right here where they have to walk by you? The nurse's station was like the center. One wing was for the babies to be born, and then they had two other halls, so it's like spokes on a wheel. So whoever was delivering the food from the kitchen had to have walked by the nurse's station at least 6 times, going and coming, and he didn't see the food being delivered, and her food was left in the hallway for what, an hour and a half, 2 hours. First they don't answer the alarms. Oh, and another thing he did. Okay, so they got to measure when she has, when she goes pee. They have to measure it. So, she's got a little call button, and every time, she pees, which was probably maybe twice a day, if that, push the call button, the nurse would come down and measure how much she peed, and then, dump it out and log it into their report. So he was on staff again. This is night. He must be a night nurse. I'm part of the day in the morning before shift change. So she peed, and I let him know that she peed, and this was another woman nurse, and she says, well, I'll tell the nurse, and they'll be down here in a little bit. And that pee pan sat there all night until about 9 o'clock the next morning, all night. So when the doctor came in to check on her, he only came once a day in the morning, usually about 9 a.m. I told him that her pee had been sitting there in the pan all night, and that it hadn't been, logged how much she peed or anything like that, and it need to be removed because, it was a little smelly. So anyways, I asked why they were not answering her call lights for, sometimes an hour. And the one nurse said that there was lots of other people in ICU who were in worse condition. But the following morning, he was sent home because of the lack of work, because they had released all those people that were in worse condition than her. But yet she stayed. They went home, and she had to stay until yesterday, October 1st. So he went home, let's see, been the 29th. He went home on the 29th, and then that's when we got the 2 other nurses who were just sweethearts. Just sweethearts. They asked, if I personally, me, Mom, who was staying there, would like them to bring me something. And, so they brought me some toast with peanut butter on it. First time any of the nurses, if me, mom, would like to have something. And I told her I'd love to have some toast with maybe some peanut butter on it. At that point I was literally starving. I didn't even know. Yeah, I laughed that they did have a cafeteria, what hours they were open. They were in fact open on the weekends when I was told they were closed, that I could order my own tray of food and pay for it myself, of course, which I did. But none of that. She never even got a toothbrush. She never got mouthwash. She never ever got, those non-slip slippers. The two nurses that came in on the 29th, the day before she was released, finally brought her no-skid little slippers, the socks, and her toothbrush. Been there 4 days and you finally get a toothbrush. But that's, it was absolutely horrible. Here you're worried about your child acting like a 3-year-old. You don't know what's going on with them. They still don't know what kind of virus it is, because like I said, there's over 100 different types of viruses, but they were testing for cold viruses, influenza. They weren't testing for this equine encephalitis or any type of encephalitis. They did test for what is it, mono? So I pray you guys never go through this again. So we just got home late yesterday afternoon, and putting everything away. Luckily, her boyfriend brought us coffee from the house, and luckily my son, because they're both working. My son and her boyfriend. Her boyfriend just got a job. He's his second day of work. Can't miss work, But who knows where she caught this virus. But luckily we had friends, my son and her boyfriend. My son, came and got me and took me back to the house so I could get my own medication. Because when we left, I just left in a panic. So I went and got my own medication and whatever, Boy, I could go on and on about the horror. They wouldn't even let me take a shower there. Wouldn't even let me take a shower. I got so mad I did take a shower, but the water pressure was more like a mist, a spray than, anything else. So that's what's going on now. I hope to get back to work soon, but right now it's taking care of her, taking care of her needs, making sure she's eating, drinking, getting rest, all that. So thank you for your patience. God bless you all. Thank you for the prayers. I still haven't checked my email. I'm so far behind. Thank you again. God bless you all. Bye.